First time we did it, I didn't know what was happening.
This meeting will come to order. Welcome to the February 11th meeting of the Rutherford County School Board. Leading us in our Pledge of Allegiance tonight is we have three educators from our city system. And they'll come forward and lead us in our pledge. Ladies.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, ladies. Pleased to have you tonight. We were with your chairman and director this weekend at one of the local celebrations. So again, pleased to have you as our guest tonight. Tonight, we'll please join the board in a moment of silence, and we would like to keep the Blackman High School community in our thoughts and prayers, especially the family of Daniel Winters. As I'm sure you already know, Daniel died in a car wreck this weekend, and it's always hard to have a death that affects our school system, but especially when it's one of our students. We would also ask you to remember the Broyles family. Stephen Broyles' father, James Morris Broyles, passed away this Sunday, and Stephen works in our maintenance department as a maintenance lead. So again, if you would join the board in a moment of silence. Thank you. Okay, approval of the agenda. Any discussion or motion?
Second.
Okay, Mr. Hodge and Mr. Holliday. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Approval of the consent agenda. Mr. Young and Mr. Estes. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we have one visitor tonight, Ms. Jennifer Bell. Ms. Bell, if you'll come. I'm sorry? Ball? Okay. I guess I need my reading glasses. I apologize. If you'll come forward, and the board provides 3 minutes of public comment. I'd like to remind you that we don't use names, and the board will show you respect, and we pray that you will return the favor. Again, if you would give us your name and address, and Matt has the timer going. Okay.
My name is Jennifer Ball, and I live at 5133 Chippendale Drive, Murfreesboro, Tennessee. My daughter attends Brown Chapel Elementary. And I believe this week I have sent several of you an email regarding the treatment of my daughter in regards to from some of her teachers, with the details included, of course. And as a result of the treatment of my child there, she was suspended for 3 days. Now, my concern here is she had a student teacher, whom I will not name, but said some very questionable things to her. And when she did so, my daughter lashed back at her because she felt she was lashed at. And I don't condone my daughter's what she said to the teacher, but I don't condone what the teacher said to her either. She belittled her. She made her feel inferior, like she wasn't going to assist her. And as teachers, that's their only job, is to assist children and to help them and guide them through the process of their education. And I have brought this up with her principal several times. Her principal does not want to hear any commentary from any parent as to the education and the factual and there's no valid information in some of the documents that you or the system here has. The study, was it weekly study, American's new textbook, she comes home with these documents and they're invalid. The history of them is invalid. You can go to Tennessee Gov and you can go to every government website and you can look up in your history books and they're just wrong. And when I posed this to her teacher and her principal, they brushed me off. I even took the documents down there to show them what the discrepancies were. Instead, they brushed me off. My daughter, in turn, got irritated because she knew something was wrong, and she's had this happen to her several times, where she has gotten information wrong from her educators and has to come home and be re-educated by me, which is fine. I don't mind re-educating my daughter. But I do not want my daughter to be prosecuted or belittled or anything to that nature that would make her feel inferior to other students or anybody else in the world. She doesn't deserve it.
Thank you. Mr. Odom?
I'll contact the school, see what I can find out some additional information. We do have a complaint process where you can file a complaint if you want to file a written complaint, but I'll contact the school and see. Because I remember seeing one email, and I did forward it to the school and asked them to look into it, but I haven't heard back from them. Maybe that was yesterday, something like that. You may have sent one, I think.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Mr. Odom, spotlight on education.
We do have a spotlight on education. Mr. Trey Duke's going to come up and head that up. One of the things that we're doing in the response to intervention and instruction, one of the things that we've been talking about, this is basically for a regular education program as we track students by skill, by student now, as we begin to look at what specific skill they might need to follow up on, what we might need to design an intervention for. So when we give a formative assessment or we're looking at trying to identify specific skills, a thing that we then do, the professional learning community team then get together, looks at the data, and designs interventions to address the needs that we have. And so Inspired Data is one of the ways that we look at the data collectively, and I think you're going to be surprised, it's one of the tools that our schools have to help us when we're developing the intervention programs. Mr. Duke.
Thank you. As Mr. Odom said, we're always looking at how do we better analyze our data. We know that data really is going to be that engine that drives our system of supports. How we intervene as a school to help our students is based on what they're showing us they're able to do. And as we've said in Rutherford County, we intervene with every child that needs intervention, whether they're one question away from being proficient on their assessment or if they have significant skill deficits, we want to have an intervention plan in place for that child. So tonight we're really going to highlight what two of our schools are doing, specifically with what I work with both the technology coaches in the buildings as well as the RTI coaches, and how they're kind of working together and how we're trying to get this in more of our schools' hands and train more of our teachers on it. I have with me Christina Tibbs. She's a technology coach at David Urey in Stewartsboro. I have Sherry McCrary, who's the technology coach at Christiana Middle and Christiana Elementary School, and Jennifer Bertram, who is our RTI coach at Christiana Middle School. And then also, of course, Mr. Horn and Dr. Hastings are both here from Christiana Middle, as well as Mr. George, who's a social studies teacher who uses this in his classroom quite a bit with his PLC. So what you're looking at basically is an Excel spreadsheet, and it's kind of how we typically have always looked at data as a school. We put our students' names, we put their scores on their assessments, we may put in benchmark data from the district, but we kind of just on an Excel spreadsheet are able to look at the data and see what our students are doing and how our students are performing. What we know is that when you're looking at this, it's very flat. We're looking at numbers and we're trying to interpret. And for some of us who are very proficient at Excel and very proficient at looking at data like this, it may come more naturally than to teachers who aren't as familiar. So what Inspire data allows us to do is take the information and make it really live data, make it actionable data. In a minute, you're going to see what we're going to do. But if you look at the top, this is a basic spreadsheet, and it's important to realize what you're looking at here is all the different information that this school has imported into this spreadsheet. So they have their student scores, but if you scroll over, they're also able to put the teacher's name in. If you look at math projection, that's what they're projected to do on the state assessment based on their previous year's data. Also, demographic information. We know we're very concerned in making sure we close achievement gaps between our subgroups, so we can put demographic information, import that straight from our teacher database, the website. So I'm going to turn it over to Sherry now from Christianity. She's going to show you, again, this is what most schools may be looking at and how when we import it into Inspire, what we're able to do with it.
All right, Christy, if you'll go to the plot view. One of the first things that the teachers do once they get the TVOS projection data into their spreadsheet is they take a moment to look at their students to see what are we getting when they come to us? Where do they stack up? Do I have kids that are on the high end? Do I have a lot of kids on the low end? Because that's going to help drive our instruction. You know, if I have some students, if I have a really high end of students, I really need to ramp up my instruction, and I really need to throw out some things that are a little more difficult and have them do more things that make them process and work with that skill. And on the low end, I may need to go back and fill in some gaps as I'm going through that Tier 1 instruction. So it gives me a picture of what my students look like on that front end. Now, if you roll over the dots, each dot represents a student that this teacher works with, and it gives all their information when I roll over that icon. And each icon that you're going to see in a few minutes will represent a different teacher. They're different colors and they're different shapes. So after we've looked at it as a teacher to see where our students are when we get them, the principal can, if you go to the next slide, please, can look at them as well as a grade level. All right, so the principal can see where are these kids coming to us. Okay, if you'll go to the next slide, please. This slide allows us to look at different teaching strategies, best practices. If I look at the mean score, the average of the students on the test, if I have kids that are mixed ability grouped, that they have the same abilities, my averages should be about the same. So if I have a teacher who has a much higher average, that's the teacher I want to go to get some best practice strategies, because on that skill, the bottom shows the skill that they did, 706, 3.8. That teacher really knocked it out of the park. So I want to go back and I want to find out what did she do so that I can assist my students later on. And that's one of the things the teachers talk about in PLC. Will you go to the next slide, please? The next slide helps us to see where we are as far as closing our achievement gaps. So the true are the students with disabilities, and the false are the students without disabilities. So right now on that district assessment, we know that our students without disabilities, their average score was a 71, and the average score for my students with disabilities was I think that says a 50. So I want to see, did I close the gap any? Because I have some goals that I set at the beginning of the year to close those gaps. And I want to see where am I in relationship to closing those gaps. Okay, can you go to the next slide?
So I'm going to talk about this graph. It's one of my favorite that we look at. It's really important. One of the things we're always looking at is, again, if you notice that the X and Y axis basically, for instance, district benchmark versus math projection, we can sort the data, and Ms. Tibbs is going to show you in a minute how she does that. We can sort the data versus anything in our field, and we can pull up these reports. These are some of our favorites. If you look at this report, what it's showing us is the bottom axis is the district benchmark. How did they perform on the district benchmark versus what were they projected to perform at? And it breaks it up into those quadrants. So I can look at this as a school, and if I look at the top right-hand corner, those are students who did relatively well in the district benchmark, but they were also projected to do well. If I look at the bottom quadrant, those are students who did very well in the district benchmark, and were not necessarily projected to do that well based on their previous testing data. And so I can say, okay, we're making some really good growth with these students. But then from an intervention standpoint, I can look at that upper left-hand quadrant, and I can say, here are students that are projected to do very I, as a teacher, that's a student I really need to target for some intervention because he's missing something, and I need to get in there and really figure out what's going on. So instead of just, again, looking at the data on a spreadsheet, I can really sort it in a lot of different ways to figure out what's the trends, what are we seeing, and who is it that we really need to look at for intervention. And then I think it's, oh, go ahead, sorry.
And this last slide is probably a favorite slide of the teachers. On this common formative assessment, we're looking to see how the students are doing compared to their math projection. So if I look at that student that's in the 60th percentile, or let's go the 80th percentile up at the top, Christy. So if I look at the math projection, they are projected to be in the 80th percentile. Their peers scored a, what is that on the screen? The mean score?
96.
A 96. So their peers scored a 96. They need to be close to where their peers scored to be growth for the teacher. This is the teacher's value added right here. So if that student that's sitting over here that made a 20 on the test, that is going to be a negative growth score for that teacher. So that teacher's really going to want to hold in. Even though that kid is, projected to do well, they're not doing well. We got to figure out what's going on with that student. And so that makes it real to the teachers. And they can see this is how it's going to affect not just the school, but this is how it's going to affect me personally on the teacher effect. Okay.
What we're looking at now, a lot of these reports are showing one assessment that we're looking at and overall. What we can also do with Inspire data is we can see one student's growth over a series of tests. So we can look at several assessments. So for instance, I have this is my daughter. I didn't take a picture of anybody else. But I wanted to show you that you could put pictures in there for the kids as we have on our databases. We've just taken them off for this. But if I want to track her data, I can zoom in on her and it just gives me just her, and then I can look at her common formative assessments. So now I can see not only that one assessment that we were looking at before, like her benchmark or one common formative assessment, we can see all 5 of them. So that's what these show down here. This is the first test, second, third, and so forth. So when I look here, I can see she's scoring, 100, 80, 90, 90 on most of these assessments, but then I need to look at, she scored a 60 on this 4th common formative assessment, in which as a teacher, that tells me whatever this skill was on, this student did not master that skill. So I can go back with a student who normally would not get remediation because she scores fairly high and remediate with this student on that specific skill. So we're really drilling down on individual students' needs and their scores over the entire year when they take their common formative assessments. Having said that, we can also track our subgroup data over this series of assessments as well. So bear with me because this is going to look a little crazy for a minute. But then I can choose to look at my subgroups. So this is my ELL population. So what you can see here is the yellow line shows the students who are not ELL, and the purple line shows the students who are ELL. So where Sherry showed the slide where you're tracking one test subgroup and closing that gap, I now can look at all 5 of my common formative assessments. I can see on this 4th one that my ELL outperformed my students who are non-ELL. But then I have a large gap for this 2nd common formative assessment, so I go back and I either get with the ELL teacher or I come up with a small group time where I can pull those students and remediate on that specific skill to try to close that gap before we take TCAP and assess that skill. So this is kind of how we can track long-term progress, as well as looking at the charts that Ms. Sherry showed as far as looking at one assessment at a time.
And I can speak to, I am our school's PLC coordinator. I go to all of our PLCs, and I can tell you that using this Inspire data has really changed the tone of our conversations completely. Gone are the days when you will hear statements like, my students didn't do well on this test, or my students did great. Those are far too vague of statements. We actually can look them up student by student and say, who is that green dot right there? Who is that blue dot that didn't perform like they should have been? Let's look at their names. Let's write them down. Who are our 5 or 10 most struggling students? Who are our 10 most advanced students? And how can we work to enrich their learning and help them to excel even further? How are we going to support the students who aren't where they should be? So we have very, very specific conversations now about students by name, by standards. What are we going to do? How do we need to support them? How do we need to enrich them? So it's completely changed the dynamics of our conversations and helped our PLCs be even more effective now that we can get down to which students need our attention, what kind of attention do they need. So.
And finally, I just want to highlight again who you're hearing talk tonight are our technology coaches that we have in our buildings, are the RTI coaches we have in our buildings that can help our classroom teachers who are focused on planning those lessons and focused on instruction. This is how they step in, one way they step in to say, how do I support you in the class so you can better interpret your data, so you can make better instructional decisions for your students. And so it makes me very proud because I work with both of these two divisions of the work they're doing hands-on to make student learning more achievable and student achievement more achievable for our teachers. So thank you very much.
You know, students aren't just a number. What we can do now is look at the data, and if you see a deficit skill, if that's a really critical skill, if that student is not retaught that skill or you do an intervention, then that may play into the next test or one later on, because that's a gap for that student. By being able to identify the specific student and the specific skill, then you can arrange that time to intervene and do some reteaching or what you need to do with that student. Education just come a long, long way of being able to look at each student by skill and help them individually. That's what you're doing. You're taking large schools, large areas with our PLCs and our ability to look at data and personalize it. You're bringing back some things that you tend to lose over time. So I thought y'all might enjoy seeing some of the things that people are tracking.
Questions before the ladies get away from us, board members?
Oh, yes, and how? Inspired data, actionable data. I understand and believe in what you're sharing. I see the value in it tremendously. Mr. Duke, I've seen presentations that you've done in the past, and I know you're going to be able to accomplish what I'm going to ask you to. I have a friend at work whose mother is in the hospital. She says when she took her mother into the hospital, the doctor came in and said, well, how are you? I'm fine. Well, how's this? It's fine. How's this? It's fine. The doctor turned to my friend and said, we have two kinds of patients, some that complain about everything and some that complain about absolutely nothing. Your mother is in really bad condition, but she's not going to communicate any of that to us. All of that said to make this point. In the classroom, there are all kinds of student personalities, and what this is allowing you is the basic philosophy that maybe is the good thing that comes out of No Child Left Behind, that no child is unnoticed. There are those, perhaps even in this room, that would look at all of this data and say, you're reducing my child to a cell on a spreadsheet. My child is nothing but a number or something of that nature. Tell us something that humanizes how this actually has an impact on students. I know it's there, but I need to hear it.
Yeah, and so we always talk about, and there is always conversation about data. You know, we're taking more data, and one thing that I work with the coaches, the RTI coaches, about a lot, and what we talk about, because they work direct with the PLCs, is reminding them and reminding teachers and reminding parents that getting data is not our priority. Our priority is knowing what the data tells us, because that's how we make decisions. And I'll use the same medical analogy. If I go to the doctor and I walk in and I say, these are the symptoms I have, and the doctor says, well, I'm guessing this is the problem, I'm not going to be able to feel very confident in that treatment versus him saying, let me take your temperature, let me run a CAT scan, let me figure out what's going on. And we have to trust our data. And when you look at things, and I'll use that one student who was projected to perform so high, and here's a student that, based on all of his previous, a middle school student, based on all he did in elementary school, he's projected to do very well. And right now, he's not. And as a school, we have to come out and say, hey, what's going on with this kid? Why is this kid not performing where he should be and where he has in the past? We can't intervene. We can't help that kid if we don't look not just at that one data point, but the whole history of it. So if we look at that and we see a kid's not doing very well, we have a lot of kids in our building not doing very well, right? We want to compare it to how they've done in the past. We want to compare to how do we make better instructional decisions? And we always say we don't make decisions for kids based on a hunch. I don't want a doctor making a decision for me based on a hunch that he has. I want to know, how do you know you need to take my appendix out? What data are you using to figure it? And we're going to use that same philosophy to move our kids. What do we know? If we want to move our kids, we got to identify where we want them to be and where they are. And if we don't know where they are, we can't move them to where we want them to be, and that's what data does, tells us where their kids are.
I was just going to share a specific scenario of how that's happened at our school. I know who that child really is, that data point that's laying out there. We can't show it at the board meeting, but we do know his name, and the reason why he's not performing doesn't have anything to do with academics. So he needs a whole different kind of intervention. He needs a school mentor, and our principal and assistant principal and different coaches have taken on students that they're not performing not because of academics. They need a person that checks in with them every day, every morning, every afternoon, make sure that their locker's clean. Sometimes that's the intervention that they need, organizational intervention. So looking at the data that way is our first sign, our first red flag that there's a problem, and then we click that dot. What's that student's name? What do we know about them? What's going on at home? Have they been sick? Have they been absent? Do they need someone to check in with them every day? Do they need a relationship with our guidance counselor? So the intervention that we give for the child looks different once we know that child's name. It's just that's what we use to be the first initial flag of, okay, somebody's got a problem.
And I think it's so valuable that you pointed out in the presentation how you can insert their picture, because that takes away some of the perception from the community that we are reducing them to a data point or something like that. It truly is a student that we're having a real life impact on and changing their future. And I applaud everything that you've shared with us.
And I've got to point out because at her school specifically, she has gone through and as the technology coach put a picture for every kid. And so when you're having that meeting and you're looking at that graph and it's not a dot that's going like this, it's a child. And you say, okay, this child was performing well. What happened here? And it makes it personal, very personal. The other thing is, again, I wanted to credit to teachers like Mr. George from Christiana, and what they did is this wasn't designed for this purpose. This is a program designed for teachers to use with kids to graph data. That's what it was designed for. And our teachers saw this tool and say, wait a minute, we can use this ourselves to make better decisions for our kids as well. So again, just the ingenuity of our teachers.
Is this system-wide?
It's a licensure. We have licenses for it in every school. So yeah, we currently own enough licenses to make sure every school has the ability to use this in some capacity.
So the actual grade teacher and the specialist to collaborate, is that happening on our PLC days, or is that happening daily?
Yeah, and again, you look at our PLC days when they're collaborating, you're looking at our PLC meetings that schools are having on a weekly basis when that 7th grade math team gets together. The technology coach is able to sit in there, not to go fix the computer, but to help them sort that data. Again, the teacher can't be the expert of all things, and how can they come in and help support that? The RTI coach can sit, now let's look at what we're seeing and what this means for our kids. So that collaboration is happening on a weekly basis. It's happening during those half days, but it's probably happening daily in most cases.
I was at Holloway High School yesterday and was sitting in on a math PLC meeting, and they were using Inspire Data. And they would look at, and each of those points is a specific skill or something that you wanted that child to know in their building blocks. And as they looked at it, they'd focus on it, and then one of them, the guidance counselor's there, the teacher's there. The people that's looking at the data are the people that have that student in their classroom. That's who's looking at your data, and very often the administrators in it. And so they look at this, anything you know going on this child's life that we might have an impact on? Can we change anything? Is it just the academic piece? Is it something else? So it was just amazing, as I said, and listened to the discussion and saw how much care and concern those teachers had for the kids. They were willing to do almost anything to try to help that kid move that dot from one spot to another. They talked about before-school tutoring. They talked about after-school tutoring. They talked about compass learning. They talked about, all these tools that they could bring together for John Doe to try to help him improve that score. It's come a long way, Mr. Jordan.
But it's come a long way since I was a building principal. We know that data walls are something a lot of highly effective schools use, where they'll, in teachers' lounges, or teachers will have a wall where they can track their kids so they can see it and have that mental picture. Well, what this has done, it's a 21st century virtual data wall for us.
Thank you, Mr. Ladies, thank you very much. Very impressive presentation, and I think we'll probably would like to see you again and keep us updated on how this continues to progress, because intervention and remediation seems to be keywords for us these days in every campus. So again, thank you. Okay, no other questions from the board. We'll move on to number 8.
Number 8 is our summer school in grades 6 through 12. The instruction department is requesting approval for the 2015 summer school calendar. Plans are for middle and high school course offerings. Middle school sites will be at Laverne Middle and Oakland Middle, and the high school site will be at Blackman High. Middle school and high school offerings will be available during the first semester from June 1 through June 25, 2015. The high school only second semester is scheduled from June 29 through July 24, 2015. Transportation services are not provided. Tuition will remain at $100 for the middle school, $100 per 1/2 credit for high school, and $200 for driver education. Recommend approval. The motion is to approve the instruction department's request for the summer school sites and calendar as presented.
Heard the recommendation. Mr. Young.
Second.
Second by Mr. Holliday. Of course, we had discussion last night at our work session. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Number 9.
Number 9 is the Transportation Department update for information only. The Transportation Department has put on the last bus out of 6 that were budgeted for the 2014-15 school year. This brings our total fleet to 243 buses, with a contractor passing away on January the 5th, 2015, leaving 3 bus contracts vacant, one contract being abandoned, and 2 contracts being turned in since the beginning of the school year. We're at number 16 out of 63 names on the second priority list. For 5 days in the month of January and 1 day in February, we hosted the area state required safety in-service training conducted by the state pupil transportation state troopers. These troopers also inspect all buses and reinspect buses which have been involved in accidents. We had 14 accidents and 5 injuries through December 31st, 2014, compared to 11 accidents and 3 injuries through December 31st, 2013. In the bus fleet, we have 210 transit buses and 33 special education buses. After 15 years of age, all transit buses can get a 3-year extension. Buses that have obtained the 3-year extension are required to be inspected twice a year by the state pupil transportation inspectors at a cost of $770 per year borne by the contractor. Special education buses are not eligible for extension. Below is a breakdown of our fleet by years of age. Buses can run until the end of their 18th year with unlimited mileage. After the 18th year, the bus can run until it reaches 200,000 miles, at which point it must be removed from service.
Chairman, we did have some discussion about this last night, but it's worth noting just the magnitude of our system and, all of the details. Even though this is a contracted service, it's not one that we keep in-house. We still have the responsibility of tracking all of this information, reporting all of this information, and making sure that everyone is in compliance. And a report like this is very valuable to help us to understand that all of that is being done.
We can remind the public that all of our buses have cameras. If I remember correctly, there's one in the front and one on the side, or two.
There's one in the front that points down into the stairwell. There's one in the front that shoots back, and then there's one in the back that shoots front.
Good.
And I think we started this last year, any new camera systems that we are purchasing for new buses that we put on, or to replace an older camera system that we can no longer repair because of the age, we are adding a fourth camera in the middle of the bus to take pictures of that, because we found that there's stuff happening there. Recording.
Kind of a blind spot.
Yeah.
Okay. Moving on to number 10.
Number 10 is new and revised policies, and this will be the second and final reading on two policies. Policy 5.501, under complaints and grievances. The revision will delete the portion of the policy allowing an appeal to the Board of Education. And policy 6.600, student records. The revision will incorporate the Tennessee School Board Association's model for student records. Recommend approval. The motion is to approve the revisions to policies 5.501 and 6.600 on second and final reading as recommended by the Policy Committee.
So move.
Motion by Mr. Jordan, second by Mr. Estes. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. We had an insurance update by Ms. Barnes on last night. Anything further that you would like to add? No, sir. Okay. Good. Again, thank you for that presentation. Mr. Hodge is the board's representative to the Tennessee Legislative Network. Mr. Hodge, would you like to provide any information tonight?
I think the House version was pulled in the House subcommittee or tabled. It can come back, but they put it off as tabled, that's what I understood. It's House Bill 0003, I think, was pulled.
Do we have a copy?
No.
That's okay.
Yes, that's the summary of a number of bills.
Oh, that's okay. How many education bills have been submitted as far as you know?
There are hundreds expected.
Oh, okay.
That's just some of the ones that's right now.
Okay. Oh, that's okay, Mr. Hodges.
Also on the letter we sent to legislators, I haven't heard anything. I don't know if any of the other board members have either. So I would like to see you, Mr. Chairman. I think next week we're going down to Dale Hill. If you can possibly set up individual meetings with them.
Yes, sir.
I think that carries a little bit more weight than the rest of it.
Ms. Joyce, would you assist me in possibly making specific appointments with our legislative delegation? Okay. Well, I think that's Tuesday. Okay. I haven't looked at my schedule lately, so I suspect before this legislative year is over, Mr. Hodge, you're going to have a file folder full of bills. Yes, sir. How many do you have there that are of a particular interest?
There's probably 15 right here. So that's my should be able to copy. This is
let him pass those out. If you don't, we'll take a moment, Mr. Hodge, and then everybody can look them over. Like Mr. Odom said, there'll be hundreds probably filed. It just depends on whether or not they make it through committee or not. Or I guess today, because there's two committees now, isn't there, Mr. Hodge? And House side. Board members, I'm sure Mr. Hodge will be providing us with other bills that have come down the pike over the next few weeks, and we'll continue to stay in touch with him. And Mr. Hodge, thank you for being willing to guide us in this, because it's trying to meander through all of these bills can be time consuming. So thank you very much. Any questions for Mr. Hodge before we move on? Mr. Holliday, thank you for representing the board in the Federal Relations Network. Of course, you went to D.C. and met with our senators and our congressional delegation. And would you like to update us on what you discovered while you were in the Beltway?
Thank you. The exciting time will be next week to go to Day on the Hill for our state representation, but exciting time for Rutherford County a week ago when I had the opportunity to represent our board in Washington, D.C. There were 7 of us from the state of Tennessee that went. We were able to meet face-to-face with Senators Alexander and Corker, Representative Fleischman, Representative Desjardins, and Representative Blackburn. And so those were all very important meetings. We had many other meetings with staff, and sometimes those are just as important or even more so, because it's so much the staff that accomplishes the legislation and briefing the representatives and senators on what's going on in the task at hand. There were a couple of issues that I wanted to bring up. One is the reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. Our Senator Alexander is chairman of the Senate Education, Labor, Health, and Pensions Committee. That committee is responsible for over 52% of everything that is tasked to the Senate of the United States. It goes through that committee. And so his influence there is outstanding. His influence is tremendous. And his influence right now is focused on reauthorization of the ESEA Act. In so doing, he explained to us that he has written a bill that is a starting point that's rather open language. And he's done that very intentionally because he's interested in the more controversial issues being decided through a robust debate and conversation about those topics. Some of those topics are mandatory testing from the federal government. There is not a reference to how many tests will be required from the federal government in his legislation. He wants that to be decided in open debate. And I think it's a real transition from a time period where we've had two parties in Congress looking at one another and stagnated by mistrust and accusations of one another and no compromise whatsoever, to a place where Senator Alexander is leading the diplomacy that will invite an open discussion where we will all be able to see what it is that turns out a requirement that he suggested might be 17 tests. Now, that's not 17 tests for one student. That's 17 tests third through high school. So third grade through high school, we're talking about all of those different grades that a system might have, 17 tests that are required by the federal government. If you wanted to do more than that because of the individual state or test or the philosophy in that state, you could certainly do that. But for a third grader, you're talking about a beginning test and an ending test, which is kind of what we've discussed here on our board. but 17 tests is where he anticipates that the legislation may come out. The manner in which a school is labeled because of federal legislation that says that a school is failing or a school is succeeding or those kind of things, he takes all the penalties away from that. Do we want to know what that school is doing? Yes. But do we want to penalize a school because it's performing poorly? No. We want to help that school. And so that's right thinking right there. And so we applauded him on that. We didn't pat him on the back the whole time, though. We asked him very pointedly about vouchers. And we were glad to see that vouchers were not a part of a public education reauthorization act, and yet he shared with us that he fully intends to introduce, he himself, introduce an amendment for vouchers. He said, I don't expect it to pass, but I intend to put that out there because Senator Alexander personally believes in vouchers. We explained to him the impact that it potentially has, that it does have in other areas, where we've seen similar type of programs, and how it can really tear at the fabric of our community when public dollars go to a special interest school. It's just inappropriate, and we shared that very strongly with him. It was just a great time, a lot of good information shared, and we highlighted the National School Board Association National Conference. I got everybody a pin about that. March 21st through the 23rd, school boards from all over the nation will be here in Nashville. And they'll be meeting in the annual conference. And one of the things that they'll have the opportunity to do is to get on a bus at the Music City Center in downtown Nashville and take a trip out to the high school of the year, Stewart's Creek High School, and tour that facility and see some of the most innovative things that are happening in public education, and they're happening right here in Rutherford County. We invited Senator Alexander to come be a part of the conference, come be a part of that trip to Stewart's Creek High School, and it would be in the timing right about when we should see this legislation, hopefully, coming out of the Congress and moving toward the President's desk. Senator Alexander is confident that he can get the legislation passed in the Senate. The House has already in years past passed legislation, but it was never taken up by the Senate. So it's very likely that we're going to have reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, and that's really good. One of the things that Senator Alexander's Chief of Staff said is he has the pleasure of working for a senator that 99 other senators want to talk to. What a great statement about the state of Tennessee. Yeah, and by the way, and Bob Corker, he's not doing anything lighthearted either. He's just chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee. I mean, the influence that Tennessee has right now is just extremely powerful. And we really should be proud of what we've got, and we should be connected. All of our representatives were happy to see us. They appreciated the information that we shared with them and the way that we shared it. Another thing that we shared, because one of the other things that Senator Alexander does in his bill is he gives specific instructions to the Department of Education as to what they should be doing and what they should not be doing. And that's critical because we've lived in a time now of the waivers, and that gives the Secretary of Education too much influence over our national education system. And Senator Alexander, he did put that language in the bill, and it is explicit. So that's really good. We've learned our lesson, though, about federal overreach. And before things get too far, I've shared with you a packet that the Tennessee School Boards Association has put together in cooperation with the National School Boards Association. Now, what this talks about is something that's occurring through the Office of Civil Rights right now. When there is an occurrence where there may be a civil rights violation or some type of investigation about civil rights, the Office of Civil Rights will come into a school and they will say, we have a mandatory data request in order to investigate this situation. But what the National School Boards Association is taking notice of, and the Tennessee School Boards Association is taking issue with, is that the request for data is excessive. We heard examples of data requests that were taking as many as 28 staff members 3 days to collect all of the data. Well, that's just wasted taxpayer dollars to pull all that information together in order to turn it over to the federal government for them to conduct an investigation. The National School Boards Association is moving strongly to correct that and limit what the Office of Civil Rights can come into a school system and request from us. And they were sharing with all of the boards gathered there and the representatives that we need to be on guard as well. Whether or not the Office of Civil Rights truly has jurisdiction to request the data that they're asking for, and whether or not their request is excessive. So we need to be on guard about that, and they're raising the issue in front of us to where we don't slip into something ill-advised or just yielding to the big, powerful federal government. Likewise, there's also an issue with the Office of Civil Rights that they are writing what they call Dear Colleague letters. And an example there is that a school system is required to take action if we become aware of some type of violation. So if a student were having their rights infringed and that issue were raised to the school and we just turned a blind eye to it and we said, oh, get over it, or grow up, or whatever we said, if we ignored it in some way, then there would be culpability. However, the Office of Civil Rights even goes so far as to say in these Dear Colleague letters, you should have known about it. Doesn't matter whether or not you actually knew about it, but you should have known about it. And that is a precedent that is absolutely unfounded. And it is being referenced by judges, in their decisions that say, such as in the Dear Colleague letter from the Office of Civil Rights, you should have known about this, therefore we find you in violation. Well, there's no law, which is the Congress's responsibility, to support what's occurring there. So we raised that issue with every single representative we talked to and every senator, and they were very grateful for us raising the flag and saying, pay attention to what the Office of Civil Rights is doing and don't let them overstep their bounds the way that we've seen the Department of Education push too far in their influence. And that was a really vital part of our presentation. It gave us a lot of credibility, and I believe that the school boards, particularly in Tennessee, are going to be a powerful part of influencing our federal representatives.
Thank you, Mr. Holliday. Any board members, any question for Mr. Holliday?
I want to just make a mention, if I could, and just to follow up or kind of tag on with the conversation that Aaron had, that these folks had with Senator Alexander about his Reauthorization Act. Been doing a little research, a little digging. I've had a lot of information being sent to me regarding this. And I think Senator Alexander's act, from what my assessment thus far, is that it's a real wolf in sheep's clothing. And I would encourage all of you, obviously not to take my word for it, but to do your own research. I have, Ms. Joyce was kind enough to make copies of an article that I had pulled that was sent to me that I've given to all of you. I would encourage you to take a look at it. You know, the concerns that we have as far as the state and the federal control and taking away the control from the local, the LEAs. Some of the things that Senator Alexander is proposing in this, I'm convinced, are going to continue to precipitate that and make it even worse. Things to do with the Title I funding, following the children, which is going to lead to the whole vouchers and charter schools. And again, do your own research, but I think it merits us having further conversation as a board about this, because it is huge if Alexander's pushing this through. And if it truly, at the end of the day, is not a good thing for our Tennessee schools, we as a board, especially with the size of the Rutherford County school system, need to take a position on it.
Thank you. Mr. Holliday, again, thank you for your participation with the NSBA mission to meet with our congressional leaders. Also with the National School Board Association, David Pickler from Shelby County, immediate past president, certainly had an impact on that organization. And Bob Albee from Jackson, Madison County, I think is serving on their board. So Tennessee certainly has some influence with NSBA. At one time, I don't think we had any influence at all, but certainly have made an impact here recently. So, again, thank you. We'll open for a general discussion by board members.
We may circle back around, and I haven't had the chance to read the article that Ms. Moore has shared, but I will say, because of Mr. Odom's preparation, he had actually prepared me for how Title I funds are getting to the schools. Mr. Odom, you might talk again about this. I know you and I have had a couple of conversations about this, but it's critical to us that we not have funds that are tied specifically to the student. And we raised that issue with Senator Alexander, and it's the small nuances of how the language is in there, and it was good because the guys that actually wrote the bill are sitting there in the room, you know, the little attorneys and interns and all this, and then Senator Alexander and all of those people, and it was one of the things that I raised because you told me to, Mr. Odom, and even if we're going to have it tied to an individual student, which says if I've got 32% free and reduced at this school, then I can get 32% Title I funding at that school. If I've got 74% Title I or free and reduced at this school, then I can get 74% at that school. What was not part of his legislation, which I thought was critical in your explanation to me, Mr. Odom, was that then it is tied to only being administered to that student. Once it gets to the building, use it any way you want to. And Senator Alexander was very clear about that because I asked the question, as you had kind of instructed me to, use it any way you want to once you get to the building.
All of our schools are school-wide.
Right.
So when they receive that, any student in the school can receive services. Of course, you tend to earn the right to receive Title I funds based upon the free reduced count, the percentages there that's associated. The old program, the offer versus serve, was the ones where you just picked out certain kids that had the poverty level and they were helped, you know. And you saw tonight from the data, it's not necessarily whether the kid needs help based upon how much money their parents make or something like that. It's if they have a learning need, specific learning need. So, yes, we'd like to keep it to where that when we go to a school and we have a school-wide, we can serve any student in that school. We only have 10 of our 46 schools that are Title I. You know, there's not enough monies, obviously, to do it everywhere, but and we're trying to make modifications with the others with an extra interventionist or something like that in some of the others. But yes, I do prefer school-wide to tracking it to just individual students that's picking and choosing who may get services.
Anything else? Again, I think Mr. Holliday mentioned it, but the annual NSBA conference or convention will be here in Nashville this March, and since we're the host state, I wouldn't be surprised that many school board members, possibly some even sitting here, will be asked to serve in some capacity, since we'll have thousands of school board members from across the nation here in Nashville. So be prepared for an invite, though. Okay. Mr. Odom, anything else?
No, sir. Okay.
Reminding you about tomorrow night, Mr.
Yes.
Chairman.
Oh, yeah, commission meeting, 6 o'clock. They'll be voting on our capital projects.
And I want to thank Health and Ed and then Budget and Finance for passing along our request. There was a modification to Budget and Finance, but this, at least what's going before tomorrow night, would allow what you had planned for John Coleman, you know, that addition and rebuilding at Roy Waldron, and purchase the land for a new elementary middle complex in the Smyrna area. So that's the three main things that's on tomorrow night.
It's encouraging that both committees voted unanimously for our presentation. So that's a good thing.
That is a good thing. Very good thing.
Okay. I'm sorry, did you put your hand up, Ms. Moore? Okay, I'm sorry. Sometimes I miss you guys, and I just want to make sure I don't. So, Well, we'll see everybody tomorrow evening at the county commission. Thank you. We stand adjourned.